but I'd love to explain to you how I've worked out how the brain changes.
Please.
Okay, it's very simplified, but hopefully it makes sense. I'll use the whiteboard, okay?
Please.
Okay, so if this is, I'm not a very good drawer, okay, but if you think of the brain, that's the brain cut in half, looked at sideways, okay, and there's the spinal cord taking messages from the brain down to the body and bringing messages back up, and then here's the kind of fight, flight, or freeze reaction. It produces adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol in response to what's going on. And that's the only bit. All the bits are there when you're born, but that's the only bit that actually functions when you're born. We're really useless as a species. But then the bits of the brain, like the bits that, you know, your vision and your hearing and your coordination of movement, you can sort of watch it happening in front of your eyes as a parent. It's really amazing, isn't it? The way it happens. It really is. And those kind of are all there. And then the hypothalamus, which is, I'm not going to, it's got loads and loads of functions, okay? But one of the important things I'm going to focus on is the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that looks out for threat and danger. And what happens, so all these things are all functioning away, that's fine. There's a little bit of cortex, that's the thinking part of the brain. A little bit of that functioning when you're growing up, but really doesn't really come online till puberty, or start to come online till puberty. And then you've got, and puberty, this comes alive. And most importantly, the amygdala grows. Just normally it grows, because this is the time when, in caveman times, you were thrown out and you had to look out for threat and danger yourself. But before then, your parents did it. But now you do it. And apparently in caveman times, puberty was about 10 or 11. Not like now. Well, puberty is still 10 or 11, but it's, you know, we're not thrown out quite so much. Having said that, if you do have to look out for threat and danger yourself before puberty, it's already grown. And then at puberty, pshong. So it's not surprising that all our children and young people who were living through the earthquakes, or even in the womb at the earthquake time, and they've shown this in other natural disasters like the Ice Age, the ice thing that happened in Canada, you've got a whole load of people who are extra anxious, looking out for danger and hyper alert all the time when puberty happens, which really explains a lot of the behavior of our children and young people now. Because everybody knows also that you're hyper alert, you're kind of having flashbacks and you're kind of looking out for danger all the time, extra than normal, more than adults. And what happens then? Your sleep's disturbed, and guess what? Sleep disturbance leads to low mood. And you're always interpreting things in a negative way, and you're always looking out for the bad things. And you don't benefit from the good things. We've got a whole generation in Christchurch who are that. And then you've got all the modern stuff, you know, with the
devices,
Facebook and social media, and having to keep up, and FOMO, and, you know, all those different things. Pressures from parents, you've got to get a job, you know, all this kind of stuff. Schools, got to get your qualifications.
You've got to decide at 13 what subjects you're going to study.
You've got it, yeah. So it's not surprising that the levels of anxiety and depression are zooming up. And especially if you've already had the effects of trauma.
So we are seeing that in the population in Christchurch.
And yeah, and people don't believe us that we're worse in Christchurch, but I think we are. But having said that, if you've been a victim of any kind of abuse, whether it be neglect, whether it be sexual, mental, verbal, emotional, if you've got a parent who's not really present because of their own mental illness or their own addiction problems, or they're in jail, or they're too busy running high-five businesses, then that's already grown a bit already.
So we're beginning to see that as well with parents that are addicted to their own devices, raising children.
And this intergenerational trauma, because one of the things that happens when you're in amygdala's like this, and usually what happens when you haven't been a victim or anything's happened to you, this kind of shrinks back down because the cortex control bit comes online and says, there, dear, don't worry, I'm in charge now, you don't have to be so anxious and looking out, it's okay, I'm going to take control now. But that gets damaged as it's being developed by trauma. Brain's amazing. Okay, that might have got damaged or even destroyed, but it can make new ones. And the way you do that is, number one, develop a safe environment with people who care about you. And number two, talk. Because talk, and this is what teenagers hate, but talk and putting that into words helps make
those connections.
New connections. Yeah. And what happens in puberty, and I think this is what happens in terms of neurodiversity, is that all these centres get linked up because the brain has to make room, because these are all grey matter, if you like, all nerve centres. This is white matter. And the connections is what makes the brain function the best. And I think it's those connections getting kind of a bit muddled up sometimes during development, or partly influence of genetics, lots of different influences, but mostly genetics. They get connected up, and the idea is you get connected up so the brain can work faster and more efficiently. But sometimes those connections can get a bit muddled. Hence, I think, in neurodiversity, the sensory stuff in terms of autism and how people are really don't like bright lights or tastes or feels or that kind of thing, because the links had gone a bit different. But other things develop that can compensate for those. And often when people are hyper alert, because this is really big, they also get sensory things. They hate bright lights and loud noises because they're going like this all the time. Yeah. So I think when I explain this to teenagers, they go, "That's what it's like." They don't like this bit, but when I tell them that's the healing bit, but it's true, and it takes a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years.
So we're talking about teenagers at the moment, but the thing that came to my mind just when we were talking about it is with the limited resources that exist for parents of special needs children to raise their children, they are now living in hypervigilant households continuously.
Yeah, and that's why this is so important, and so much help needs to be given to families, so the parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles too, so they understand what's going on, and that they need to, rather than going, "Oh, just calm down, will you?" Say, okay, what do we need to do to create a calming environment?
So would it be fair to say that this could be getting worse across the generations, or is it just a point at the moment?
What happens if this isn't developed properly and you're at hyper alert is your emotions do this. And people go, "I think I might have bipolar." Well, no, it's just that your emotions aren't regulated properly because this has been damaged by the trauma.
And ADHD and autism, for example, both have dysregulation of emotions as components, as elements.
So we know that people on the autistic spectrum get paddies, and it's because their anxiety is overwhelming them usually. And it may be that because that's made worse by the environment, whereas if they have the right environment, they're fine. So it's about actually focusing on the young person or the child or the family, but how can we create environments where people can thrive? And the reason why we have more and more of this is that when you're brought up by a parent who does this, the attachment goes wrong. So you don't know what to expect, because one day your parent's wonderful, the next minute they're not, and so you can't attach securely. So we're getting more and more of this. It's multiplying because of that.